Welcome to part 3 of Tao, the Way of Nature, a full return to nature. Now let's talk about being one with nature. What does that really mean? Nature does not complain about change, including that of seasons. A plant can grow to its peak, then completely die, but it comes back due to its seed. We can be cyclical, just like nature, having fortune and misfortune, just like the trees. How you see they go from summer to winter. If you have 4 seasons, you see it's like, wow, these plants are dead, but they aren't. They come right back to life. It's life and death. We can accept these cyclical natures to become more optimistic because life doesn't end. There's always change. There's always a light side. There's always a light at the end of the tunnel. There's always a silver lining in the clouds, we mentioned. So we won't cling onto what we have or worry about what's to come. We simply build trust with the universe, with ourselves as part of the universe. We can also recognize that our life is this one big relationship where all organs work together in the body. Well, all people work together in the world. All the elements work together in the universe. All the trees work together to provide oxygen. They're all working toward essentially the same goal or purpose, even if it seems like they're on their own accord. They interact with each other. They're bound to each other because they're in the same reality. So Lao Tzu tells us, let reality become reality. We need to be like water. We mentioned before how water is another way to describe the Tao. Bruce Lee is known for saying the quote, "Be like water, my friend." So it means to be calm and even. That life lives itself. We don't need to make life work. Quote, "To tamper with it is to spoil it. To grasp it is to lose it." Try to grasp water. It can't be grasped. It's so essential for life. It can destroy tons of buildings. It can replenish all of life. And yet we can't really have a full grasp of it. We can try. It'll evaporate out of our hands even if we do get a grasp of it, right? So the things we desperately want now are often the things that bring disasters soon. Also often, good things come out of seemingly bad things. So we don't need to attach ourselves necessarily to the idea that, man, my life is going bad, man, nothing's going to come back. We need to be able to become more stoic, more powerful and vulnerable to the elements, to ride like the wind, like Lao Tzu, right? Because he saw that if you work with the fire, you're one with the fire, you're one with the water, you won't drown, you won't burn, like we said before. Just analogies to say that you won't be affected by the things that you embrace, part of your natural reality. Because you will become more in harmony with it, more in sync. You will be connected to it. And this is what we mean by being one with nature. So are we knowing enough about this universe and nature? We see that there's this world that we can ever keep learning from, as we mentioned before. But desires are not necessarily needs. Life is not about stuff. There are problems with consumerism, that is, taking in more and more food, more and more material things, as it delves us into more of the man-made world and creates less gratitude. You have to observe young children who are natural explorers with creativity without need of external reward. There are children who don't look for candy, who aren't asking for, more material things. Unless, of course, it's presented to them and it becomes a habit and they're like, wow, I really want more and more of this. Because naturally, on their own, and you can see them in nature, they can entertain themselves. They will explore, they will be creative for even the things they do obtain. Man, what could we do with it? Could we jump on it? Could I bite it? What could I do, right? It's imagination. And so, if we act more consciously, we can tend to what really matters. Understanding again the conscious mind and the unconscious mind, the hot cognition, the cold cognition. Quote, "Overfilled the cup's hands drip, better to stop pouring Retire when the work is done. This is the way to heaven. Lao Tzu. Essentially saying to know when is enough, to know our limits, so that if we do gather water and try to grasp it into our hands, we know when to let go. Like a bird knowing when to stop drinking from a pond. Knowing how much food we should give ourselves so we don't become obese or have any trouble digestion. Right? There's different things we may recognize. Spices are not necessarily food, so we wouldn't consume them in high quantities. Because we know this and we act consciously, we're able to make better choices in our life. But really, we just know what is enough. And we know what works with our nature, our body. We are just simply trying to align to what is intended for our being, for the universe. And so you see those two kids on the beach there, holding hands, and they seem pretty content with life, right? And they're mysteriously looking out into nature. There's not much more they need in life. If they're by that beach, I've gone to the beach, and people can just sit there and relax. They don't need much. That's until the external man-made world gets on their mind. Then they start to worry. But otherwise, they're just at the beach. They're just having a good time. So there's this emptiness then, not just for our minds, but for our reality physically. And so let's look at what Lao Tzu has to say about this. Shape clay into a vessel. It is the space within that makes it useful. Carve fine doors and windows. But the room is useful in its emptiness. The usefulness of what is depends on what is not. Again, going back to the idea of apophysis before, understanding what is by what is not, and wu wei, non-action. It's the negation of something, but it still is action. Okay, so this emptiness still is something, and something we must understand. It might be actually very useful. Well, passivity is the route to action. Where do you suppose to gain your energy from? You have to have energy from somewhere in order to do something in the first place. You need emptiness in your life via rest or meditation. It is the yin for the yang, or the thoughts that arise. Your brain uses a lot of energy. Your body uses a lot of energy, and we consider those active, yang. But they need rest. They need time. And so they need the space. They need all these aspects that we would consider generally yin. So you may notice this in the simple breath or cup of water. We cannot undervalue sleep and its need. Religious, spiritual, and scientific stories of the universe coming into being all affirm how something may come from nothing. Sound comes from silence. Nothing, which is yin, versus being, which is yang. Okay? So when I say religious, spiritual, or scientific stories of the universe actually support this notion, you can actually go to many spiritual texts and you see how the breath is related to creating life, how nothing is actually the root to something. Because again, you need the space which allows it. Okay? Look at this room, the picture of a room, a chair in it. You can't put the chair in the room if there's no room in the room. It's what makes it a room. The room. Right? And it sounds so simplistic. But we may undervalue that such simplistic idea, that idea of having space in our lives, rather than trying to always clutter it, try to fill the void, feeling like we need to always fill the void. Maybe we don't. You know, our minds can get us so preoccupied with things, especially as we get distracted. And then we forget the underlying things, the most important things in life. And that which gives us the time to really reflect on ourselves in case we need to create more conscious action in the very first place. So there's a connectedness in nature. Again, us being a part of nature. I can ask you that simple question. Are we a part of nature? Now, we may be a part. Are we a part, right? Everything depends on another. If we lived forever, we'd have no terms of being alive due to us not being alive. Isn't that funny? So precious moments would not be so meaningful if we didn't have these distinctions in life. Do we need to fear death when it helps us feel alive? When we see that the bad, again, helps us understand the good, We don't have to see the bad necessarily as bad, but part of the process, part of this great life of learning, forever learning, connectedness to help us in our journey, to savor the moments more. Okay, so let us understand this core concept that we're talking about with nothingness. To be more specific, no thingness. No thing. Placing value onto material things reduces our own value. What does money mean to death? Maintaining the objects of our acquisition is an even greater challenge than acquiring them. So we say we want something. Remember the hedonic treadmill we mentioned before. We desire something, we obtain it, but then soon we desire more things. And guess what? Now you still have the responsibilities of the other thing that you obtained. And then you're going to get more and more responsibilities until you overwhelm yourself. And then you're not actually going to be as happy, even though you have everything that you ever wanted. Interesting, huh? So consumerism is a sort of a trap, which emptiness or nothingness can help solve for us. We are taught to think or be distracted, but not taught how to consciously not think. Consciously not do anything, right? Wu wei. And so learning how to quiet the mind will help reveal that of which we missed or should pay attention to. We talked before about internal alchemy and how there's even certain meditations like the Secret of the Golden Flower that Carl Jung talks about, where we can really learn to quiet that mind, and how valuable it is, especially undervalued in the West. And so, if we are stuck in the world of thoughts, we think entirely in symbols detached from reality. Because every letter, for instance, every word that you use, and you learn this in school at a very young age, these are symbols, right? I mean, you can even look at Chinese characters, and some of them are quite literally inspired by the natural world of just observing how things look. And the Egyptians did this too. Some of them worshipped gods too that were birds or snakes, and they all had symbolic reasons behind why they did that, trying again to capture reality into a man-made symbol, into a man-made title or category. And that can sometimes stray us away from the mystery of seeing the bigger picture past it. So we think entirely in symbols, and then it detaches ourselves from reality, which doesn't really have any symbols. You look into nature, and honestly, the tree is just a tree. You don't have to think of it as, oh, it has this molecule and this and that. You only know that because you got a microscope. Now, there's other ways to prove that. Again, the ancients were telling us knowledge that we now approved with microscopes, and you can ask yourself and be like, how did they know that? But maybe it's because they really quieted their mind and listened to nature rather than having to use the things, the material things, in order to help them supposedly align to nature. That's not to say we don't use those man-made things. There's plenty of man-made things that can help us in our pursuit of nature, but we have to realize what was always there. For instance, a ventilator can help us breathe. We can say that ventilator is great, but we do it to help us breathe. We want to breathe. That's what we should do. Why are people having a hard time breathing in the first place? That would be something I would be concerned about. Getting down to the roots, realizing that that machine exists because of something else that we cannot ignore, right? And so if we are stuck in the world of thoughts, we think entirely in symbols detached from reality. Madness may relate to talking to ourselves, having all these thoughts in our heads, having it bombard us in daily life. Oh, I gotta do this, I gotta do that. Oh, did you hear about this? Did you hear about that? Oh, look at this. Like, we're so focused on it a lot of the time. And at least this is what I can see, especially in the Western world. And again, you may or may not share that experience, but we may engage in things just to divert ourselves from the emptiness reality, just to diverge ourselves from having to look at ourselves, from having to change our own behavior, confront our own traumas, our shadow work, as Carl Jung would say. We don't want to sit down with ourselves, be present, or take the time to reflect or empty our mind because we're afraid to some extent. And again, we don't also see the value in nothingness, in emptiness, in simplicity. But there's a reason why all the spiritual teachers of the past were talking about it, and you see it over and over and over again. It's not like it's just one person saying this. You go through most Eastern philosophy, back in ancient times especially, and it talks about this. And there's a lot of people who are spiritual today who even engage in something called minimalism, and they find great benefit for themselves because it creates a clearer mind. I know this for a fact as well. When I was moving out of my old house, my mind was clearer than ever because I had nothing in the room. I actually liked it. It was like a feeling of freedom. Not having to worry about it, not feeling so cluttered, and feeling something different as well, right? So we chase money, which has no real value except what we think. Honestly, if we are being honest with ourselves, it's just a piece of paper. It's just a piece of paper, this money that we attach ourselves to. Now, maybe it's gold, maybe it's silver, but even then, it's still things that we attach value to. And is it as valuable as, say, your life, or food itself, or the things that we may use money for? And do we attach ourselves more to money than those very things which we say we want money for? And so we can also question celebrities. You know, we praise celebrities, we put people up on pedestals, but they're just people like you and I, right? Are they not? Okay, they have some accomplishments and they've done some things and they can be admirable to some regards, but do we need to worship them? Do we need to praise them and put them up on this standard of, wow, this person's better than everybody else, or they can do things other people can't do, or they need to have a red carpet, we need to give them more money, or whatever? You know, it's a sort of a fixation, a hyperfixation on other people and other things, when there's value within yourself, and you can learn from other people and use things for yourself. But many people will attach themselves to those things and want more things. They'll attach themselves to the celebrities and it becomes their reality. They're so involved. They become what a lot of people call nowadays parasocial, as if they are part of the celebrity. They know the celebrity and they live their life. They watch their vlogs. They watch their videos. They engage in everything they do. But now they lose touch with their own individual present reality. So this is the value of being able to step back and see the value in no thingness. We need to clear the mind, because for the problem to be, you need to be thinking about it. Your mentality matters. If your attention moves elsewhere, the problem ceases to exist until you next think about it. Quote, "If you can empty your mind of thoughts, your heart will know the tranquility of peace." Lao Tzu. Quote, "Paradoxical as it may seem, the purposeful life has no content, no point. It hurries on and misses everything. Not hurrying, the purposeless life misses nothing. For it is only when there is no goal and no rush that the human senses are fully open to receive the world." Alan Watts. And he says, seeing the emptiness of things can help us cultivate stillness and peace of mind. If you do not know how to keep still in this crazy world, you will be drawn into all kinds of unnecessary trouble. So, a peace of mind. And it can get really troubling in the modern world if you are constantly hearing about nuclear bombs, this country, that country, this person, this death, and this robbery, and you go on the news and you see this constant stream of, all this stuff has happened. You need to be up to date. You need to know about the weather. You need to know about that. But do you actually need it? Is it essential for your living? Do you, in your nature, rely on it for your living, for your thriving? Or is it actually a hindrance on it that makes you worry more, that makes you too careful, or that makes you want to do bad things, things you would have never thought of, have all these thoughts in your head you would have never had? if you weren't exposed to that information, to that fear. And seeing as it is fear, or seeing it as distracting, is what allows us to then have a peace of mind to say, I don't need this anymore. People take a break from technology. People take a break from the world of thoughts. They go on vacation, and they do this because, again, it helps them clear their mind. It helps them get away from the busyness of the world. But that busyness is often very much self-inflicted. So if we want to get out of that, we have to realize that we probably caused it for ourselves. And we can help ourselves then get out of it. Because a lot of the problems in the world, we may say we don't have a place to really fix it, that we can't fix it, that it's helpless or hopeless. But in reality, we do contribute to it. Again, everything is interconnected. So realize your part. Realize your place. Do not undervalue yourself. And again, don't externalize everything. Don't also internalize everything. But remember what Lao Tzu says, look within. These are where the answers are found, because you as an individual, you do have a mind of your own. And you don't want to let that mind become corrupted or too influenced by other minds and the external world. You have it for your own for a reason. So there's uselessness that we need to see the value in. Talking about nothingness and talking about not being so busy all the time, not having a clear goal or direction in life that many people are looking for. Maybe it's the exact opposite. When a tree is not being used, it leads to its preservation. As I mentioned before, it can be useful for other means. When humans don't possess many desirable traits, we are often saved from a lot of trouble. Similarly, we can't hold on to the external. Many people use unhealthy coping mechanisms, and they don't let go into nature. They let go into technology or drugs or alcohol or things that will ultimately just keep pushing down what is coming up to the surface. And again, nature's giving you signs. It's giving you acne. It's giving you signs in your life, stress, these feelings that aren't to be ignored. It's your body saying, I can't take this anymore. I need something to change. And so if you keep pushing it down with coping mechanisms, it's still there and it hasn't been addressed until you address it and face it head on, essentially. But how do you face it head on? Perhaps it's this letting go process. It is actually fasting the heart. We will talk about this more, and we've talked about it a little bit before, and again with internal alchemy. This is all related. Useful people can't be useful without those that have no use. There can't be doctors without patients. If you are perceived as a bad person, you can realize that you can make others feel good about themselves. Nobody is actually useless. Nothing is actually useless. I never strive to make this presentation, for instance. It came naturally. There still is effort involved, but none of it is forced. I think about a lot, and I clear my mind away from it often, so I can focus on myself and focus on what really matters, my own reality here. But I want to help your reality, and I see how helpful this information can be. So I do have a moral obligation to share it with you. But I do not forget about the yin. I do not forget about my emptiness. There are times I can get distracted, right? Even while making the presentation. But I can choose how I react. So I don't become reactive, but responsive in the fact of I am choosing consciously where to place my attention, what I'm giving my time, and if I find it actually really beneficial, which, this information helps myself. It doesn't just help you. I made this for many reasons. I wanted people in this community to come together around so much of this knowledge, as much as the knowledge comes together on its own. Because I realized that hasn't really been done on the internet before. And the internet is this tool that we can use to help further our progression of knowledge, or our understanding of the dangers of knowledge even. It's simply an aggregator of bringing out more of this human expression. And that has some downsides and it has some good sides. I'm trying to use it for a good purpose, right? But part of that purpose is realizing nature was before this screen, this presentation you see right now. Nature was before this. Talking face to face was before this. Being present among each other was before this. Let's not forget about the roots. That is the true value in life because it's nature. And we would hopefully use tools like this to help us in that pursuit. Because many people like that. There's many sciences emerging about simply being among each other or being grounded with the earth and being in touch and in contact. And we don't have that contact as much if we're on technology, for instance. So what is a Taoist lifestyle? Because I talk a lot so far in this presentation about essentially what we can do for ourselves and our minds. But what about as a whole, in our entire life as a whole? Well, a Taoist lifestyle looks something like this, okay? Meditative walking in nature, and especially in the morning. Now, do not judge yourself, again, if you do not do all of these things. They are to inspire you and help you understand that these can help you perhaps in your alignment to nature, but you can experiment with these on your own. So going to bed at 9 to 11, waking at 5 to 7, you can look out in nature and see that a lot of animals go to bed when the sun comes down and then they wake up when the sun goes up. Now, me personally, at this moment of recording this presentation, I absolutely do not follow this schedule. And I have no problem with admitting that to you guys. Because the first step to changing something is admitting that you haven't done it, or admitting your own faults. Or as Socrates would say, realizing your own ignorance is basically your path, your first step toward knowledge. Okay, so it's no shame to feel like, oh man, I'm not doing that. It's just to realize the value that may be therein doing that. And to try it and see what happens. And maybe developing a schedule and seeing how everything in nature follows this schedule. So why aren't humans? Now, we can eat until 80% full. To not overeat. This is like a simple tip or rule of advice. And getting a balance of macronutrients. There's a lot of people who have very strict ways of eating. And I'm not here to say exactly what you should do. You should be able to experiment and find out what works for you. I think if people are honest with themselves, they'll say, yeah, this food is more natural than this one. This food is healthier for me, and they know. So trust your internal wisdom. Make sure to reflect on these foods and think about what is actually going to fulfill your health. And oftentimes people may eat very fast, and they overeat because it's really good or it's addictive. And they may not realize that the food's addictive or it's tricking their taste buds or there's sugar in it. They're not conscious, they're not breathing, they're not putting the place sitting down once in a while, looking around, sitting with friends, sitting with family, playing music, playing games. These are things that can really help an individual in their own health, right? And I say this again, it depends on people and seasons and all this stuff, but generally speaking, you look across tribes, you look across ancient cultures, and these are what the people did. This is what brought you to where you are now. And being conscious of the food we consume can then help us understand when we might become full, so we don't overeat. And that's very important because we don't want to overload our digestion. Even Hippocrates, again, the father of Western medicine, said, the digestion is the root to all evil. And a lot of digestion takes place in the gut, which he says is the root to all disease as well. And that's over 90% of the immune system, according to modern science. So you also need to exercise. This is important. It's the yang part of your life you may consider. And that is for balance with the inactivity. For instance, you watching the seminar, I doubt you're actively working out right now. Now, maybe you are and you're doing both at the same time, though it may be better to focus on the information to be more inactive. But maybe after you watch this, or if you want to take a break, maybe do some Tai Chi, do something that gets your body moving a little bit, jump around, have fun. There's no strict way of necessarily expressing that Chi and energy. It's always happening. Every time you do some sort of energy movement, you're expressing that qi, right? And so if you do intense exercise, complement it with stretching and meditation. Realize the yins and yangs in your life. I think that alone can help your entire lifestyle, because that's Taoism in a nutshell, right? You're listening to your body to know what to do. This is the yin for the yang. And you want to make generosity your default position, because you can observe how receptive the world will become. Again, going back to the three treasures: simplicity or frugality, humility, compassion or kindness. And a lot of people say they want this in the world. Well, if they want that in the world, be the example of change. Show it, start it. You can be the one. Don't rely on others, right? See, if you come from that position, how other people react. Now, not everybody's going to react the exact way you want them to react, but see generally net positive across the board how people react. Positive to positive, it would make sense to me. Now, again, there's many different influences in the world that can affect people's mentalities, but that does not mean that we just ignore what we know we should do to help maximize and optimize our potential here on Earth. And again, the golden rule is very much related to this notion. So do also learn from other animals while recognizing your own species. Recognize you're not other animals, you're a human being. So you have many aspects therein, like intellect and the mind, which can create all sorts of crazy things. That is beautiful and amazing. But there's also animals that are always with their family, that are always following this sleeping schedule, that are listening to their body of when is enough to drink and eat, etc. And they go to bed at the right time. They master balance, and they do so without effort. They don't do so with all this complex thinking of humanity. They do so because it's part of their intuition. They listen to their intuition, and they aren't distracted by so much materialism. They don't need materialism as much as humans. Again, we're the ones creating it for the most part anyways. So we can learn from other animals. Even Mark Twain wrote about this, saying how humans are essentially the lowest animal. I thought that was quite significant because it helps us become more have more humility in our lives, to recognize we aren't on top of all the other animals. We aren't to rule over them, but recognize that we are among them. We are all part of nature. Again, the minute we start putting ourselves higher, we dim our own light, as Lao Tzu said before. So we want to achieve our flow state with Wu Wei, i.e. the dance dances itself. Typing types itself. I don't even have to think about typing. I've gotten to the point where it just happens on its own. And you know what? I didn't learn how to type. I didn't do anything like that, take any courses. I just sat at the keyboard and typed. And yes, I was originally looking at the keys, but over time, I didn't have to look at the keys anymore. It just became natural. Again, second nature. It became Wu Wei, and it became a flow to the point where I can look away and start typing like this. It's amazing. So we can learn how to truly relax and prevent overstimulation. Learn how to take action when necessary, and learn how to relax so the world doesn't get to us. This, in whole, is generally a summary that I see of the Taoist lifestyle. Now, we can adapt to life, because this is a very important notion of understanding why we would see the value in nothingness or uselessness, or see the value in Wu Wei and not doing. It's all for a process of adapting to the ever-changing life or Tao itself, and that adaptation is embracing change. If something that needs changing can be changed, it is worth taking action. If it cannot be changed, we must adapt and accept. The living are soft and yielding, the dead are rigid and stiff. Living plants are flexible and tender, the dead are brittle and dry. Lao Tzu. Follow your strength instead of trying to repair your weakness. Now, some of this might sound like I'm repeating what I said before in order to emphasize these examples, right? And to help you further understand the connections between the points we're making as we introduce new concepts. Because oftentimes, again, we forget the past, we forget the ever-present, to be more specific. We forget the yin or the things that are hidden, that are still there, that we just have yet to see. And we do have strengths, even if we say we are weak, even if we push ourselves down, we just aren't giving light to that of which is not so down in the deeps. I mean, we push on ourselves all the time, we make all these judgments, but we don't realize we still have it better than other people. And that gives you reason to say, well, gosh, why am I then so pushing myself down? And how does it help for me to push myself down? It doesn't help my current circumstance, right? I can understand why I might be feeling down, but I don't need to succumb to that. It doesn't need to be my reality. Like, again, suffering does not need to be my entire experience of life. It can just be one part of the experience of life, but it doesn't take us down. And so do not fall to coping mechanisms. Realize them as coping mechanisms. Realize your distractions. Don't escape life. Address the problems. Experience life. Face fears. Life doesn't need to be enjoyed or suffered. It only needs to be lived. Quote, pursue knowledge, gain daily. Pursue Tao, lose daily. Lose and lose again. Arrive at non-doing. Arrive at wu-wei. Instead of trying to be occupied, make time for emptiness. That might be one of the greatest Taoist lifestyle tips that it can offer us, is helping us realize that we don't need to be so occupied, that we can give some space for the yin, which should have as much space, if not more, than the yang if we are in a yang extreme world. And if I generally ask somebody, or if I ask yourself, do you give more time to what you are doing or what you are not doing? I guarantee a lot of people will say it's what they're doing, because they think that's what's important. But they need to realize that it's also very important to have fun, to let go, to be present, to let the mind relax. And this idea of unlearning, of knowing less, losing daily rather than gaining daily, relates to a concept called unschooling. The concept of unlearning in Taoism may be related to that of unschooling, to provide freedom rather than indoctrination. Because that's ultimately what happens when we free ourselves of the desires and attachments. We achieve freedom. We are able to see more. We're able to find out our opportunities and see more potential. And Dana Martin has written a great book about this, in case you're interested, or maybe you have children or you plan on having children in the future. This helps you get started, essentially, with getting your kids out of the system, the current man-made, dogmatic, yang-based systems that you may see are destructive, and maybe you don't, and you want to balance that. Whatever choice you want to have with this, I want people to simply be aware of this, because unschooling and unlearning kind of go hand in hand here with realizing what do you actually want to do? What do you actually want to learn? Rather than having some set curriculum and structure telling you what to think, where you're not learning how to think, or you're not really pursuing your own interests. And Dana Martin really emphasizes the idea of the child should want to learn. The child should want to enjoy their schooling experience. They shouldn't feel like they have this burden on them. I remember having tons of nightmares when I was in public school and worrying about the kids and how they judge me and all this stuff. And you may say, yeah, that's something every kid needs to learn. Doesn't mean that we have to torture them and put them through the modern busyness of the world just so they have to experience that reality. That's not our natural reality. And if we're being honest with ourselves, schooling at most starts with the parents. It's your own kid, and they're going to be with you for the rest of time. I remember my teachers, but I never see them again. I remember a lot of my schoolmates, but I'm never going to really see them again. And so when you are with your family, you're going to have your family till the end of time, and your family, they're the ones who held you when you were a baby. It's a very important thing. Again, our ancestors, I don't think, would pass this up. They were with each other a lot. And so it's just something to bear in mind. Take this as you will. But radical unschooling, a revolution has begun. It's definitely helped people see the value in homeschooling, this book. So be sure to check it out if you're interested. Having control. Well, it looks like humans want to have control over everything, but letting go and being able to have nothing, or in the sense of simplicity, realize the value in nothing, maybe means the opposite. So your thoughts can take control over your own life, even though you are more than your thoughts. Okay? You are way more than just what your mind is yabbering about in your head. You attach yourself to labels or judgments, even though you are more than that. You put yourself down even when problems are inevitable. Again, you're going to run into problems. By giving compassion to both yourself and others, you give yourself and others freedom. You say, it's okay, it's fine, it is what it is. We can hold all experiences and learn from even the most intense emotions and judgments. We can just let it flow past us, not becoming attached. You can watch your reactions, treat them with kindness. This is the common saying, this too shall pass, or no storm lasts forever, or change is the only constant. But the speed and how we react is up to us. Do not forget "and" in regard to solutions. So someone may mention to you, wow, meditation's great. Being simplistic, having less material things is great, but don't forget about what other solutions also exist out there, okay? Because as great as meditation may be, somebody might need therapy. Someone might need someone who can sit there and be that outsider for them and see the thoughts that they can't inquire for themselves, that are so deeply ingrained within them. An outsider point of view. We'll talk more about that as well, but we see this is why there's practitioners of internal alchemy. There's the individual that can practice it on their own, but then there's practitioners who aim at helping other people with their own alchemy. There's a reason why they want to help other people. There's a reason why I made this presentation. When you can read the Tao Te Ching for yourself and understand it for yourself, there's a reason why there's a bunch of content creators like me or Sanjoy or George Thompson and many others who will produce tons of content about mere poetry, because we can expand on it and we can provide more perspective on it, more clarity as to what it's saying, right? And it maybe can help inspire you to realize you can do the same thing. Absolutely. So we learn to stop controlling our environment and we learn how to let go. This is, again, Wu Wei. To stop controlling nature is to instead allow nature. The journey is the destination. Let us not project upon nature. Do you, don't do others. Those who are trying to control everything make life unbearable for everyone. This is based in fear of not having control. You can think of many people who want to keep their position of power in the world. Man, they're going to try to hold on for that for their life, and that may mean at the cost of other individuals in their life. Well, that's why it makes life quite unbearable. So, anytime people have fear of themselves or others, expect it to give way to many problems in the world. Are they really fearing catastrophe when people fear not having control? Well, they're not fearing catastrophe, they're fearing not having control. And that's the truth. People are also afraid of doing nothing, that they will do something even if it makes situations worse. They don't actually fear catastrophe, they fear just losing a grasp on life and losing a sense of control, losing their sense of direction, losing the fact that they know it all. And you see this in politics, you see this in many ideologies. I know the way of the world and no one else knows. I got all the answers. Medicine, the same thing. This is the only drug. This is going to heal everybody. This diet. Very dogmatic, we may say, because people are fearing the idea that there can be another way. And they don't actually fear the catastrophe of the fact that, they might be wrong. They also just simply fear the fact that they don't want their own image to be ruined, their own reputation, the fact that they've held on to something for so long. It's an attachment, and so we perceive doing something as success or uselessness, being in control. whereas doing nothing as uninterested or as weak. So we intentionally not just don't see the value in doing nothing or non-action, we quite literally say it's bad. We say it's uninterested, weak, it's not something that should happen, when I could gladfully admit that me not pushing myself out there has prevented a lot of trouble in the world, because I can observe others who do, and they run into problems all the time, and they have to worry about this and that, and I enjoy my life, as simple as it may be. They can go out and risk their life and may not be fearful. Okay, great. But then there's times where they have a lot of responsibilities because of all the things that they gather with them and attach to themselves, and then that can take a burden on them over time. So it's about realizing that we can take risks in our lives and be fearless, but at the same time, take the moment back to be conscious of what we're doing, with that emptiness, that empty space, cold to hot cognition. Okay, so we are allowing life when we realize the value of nothingness, no-thingness. When you arrive at non-action, Lao Tzu tells us, nothing will be left undone. Mastery of the world is achieved by letting things take their natural course. You cannot master the world by changing the natural way. So he's telling us that humans are trying to change reality, trying to master the world, but they may be doing so not realizing that there's a natural way in the universe. There's this Tao, there's this course of things, this ever-present change that means that it's way beyond you. It means that you can try to change things according to your whim, your opinion, but realize to an extent you have to let go to what simply is truth or reality itself in its own way. And so anger will dissolve, opinions change, food must be given time to cook. We can't keep touching our wounds. We should keep our hands to ourselves. All these notions, we can sit with our problems, letting them erode. Quote, "Who can be still until the mud settles and the water is cleared by itself? Can you remain tranquil until right action occurs by itself? The master doesn't seek fulfillment, for only those who are not full are able to be used, which brings the feeling of completeness." So again, we're freeing ourselves in our minds by allowing our minds to not be so attached and allowing ourselves to just go with the natural way of the world, allowing the mud to settle because we become still, we become tranquil. And the right actions come at the right time. We act at the right time. We don't seek to go beyond our means, necessarily. We simply do as we must. It is what it is. And so it's the law of reverse effect. This is a term coined by Aldous Huxley, and it's also called the law of reverse effort, or the backwards law. Quote, "The harder we try with the conscious will to do something, the less we shall succeed." That's essentially this law of reverse effect. If we accomplished so much, why must we continually remind others? These people who like to brag about their accomplishments. Well, can our accomplishments speak for themselves? We become more admirable not trying to be admirable, because the more we try to push what we have in other people's faces, we actually make ourselves less of an admirable person, even though that's what we're trying to aim for. Again, the sense of humility or humbleness. So this is how we don't have an ego. We become humble and secure with ourselves. We can't force creativity. Mystery drives creativity. And so we can't really push ourselves to be creative. Actually, quite the opposite. During peaceful moments, showers, walks, before bed, we get ideas basically spontaneously. And man, do I know this from experience. Being someone who, I consider myself an inventor since a very young age. I've liked to reinvent games and make new things all the time, new forms of things. I would merge them together and essentially improvise, right? But all my ideas, a lot of them came during these exact times, showers, walks, and before bed. And so when I came across this idea of the law of reverse effect, I was like, this is it. This is that light that Thomas Jefferson or Benjamin Franklin was talking about, where suddenly you get this light bulb of an idea and it's there in this random second in time, and if you don't capture it then, you might forget about it. And that's why I write everything down sometimes. And writing down helps a lot. There's a lot of, medical literature about writing down your thoughts, journaling what you eat, and how that can be beneficial because you are reflecting and putting it down on paper so you can see for yourself your own thoughts and how they progress over time. But those ideas that allow you to write in that moment and be in that flow and to have a spontaneity in life, this is all Wu Wei. And it's so valuable because this is when some of the best ideas come out, right? So we can't get in the way of our own nature. Quote, "The paradox of Wu Wei is that striving less, not trying harder to win at all costs, often generates more success." And that's a quote from an athlete. His name is Christopher Berglund. And there's many people, athletes, who are just in the zone. If they were worrying so much about what they were doing, they would probably worry less about the game. But the thing is, when they're in the game, they're not worried because they're in the game. They're immersed. They're part of the world. Remember how I said before about World of Warcraft, you're part of the world. You're part of those passive abilities. You accept reality as it is, and the more you immerse yourself in a video game like World of Warcraft or any other game, the more you start to master it because you're one with the game. So the same thing with nature. You become one with nature by immersing yourself part of it. And so Wu Wei involves not a focus on results. So we can become more immersive, we become more present. We're not so focused on the results. If we were so focused on the results, we would be, wow, when's the end of the song? Well, then there's no point of the song. The song is so we can enjoy the song in every present moment. I know people who talk about how they have ADHD and it helps for them to listen to music because it keeps their mind more present. And there's people who talk about during meditation to listen to sounds because it helps you be more present. So this is just a little bit of understanding this sense of being in the zone or Wu Wei immersion. Think of driving. How people are presently focusing on their ability, not able to predict everything in the future, who's going to do what, but focusing on their ability. In the same way, again, an athlete plays in a game. And so this allows a writer to write or an athlete to perform. Before effects are actions, and so we're focusing on the actions. Results don't come from desiring hard or constant thinking. They come through action. That is the very root to effects in the first place. So this law may also be known as, if an individual attempts to resist reality, it will make problems worse, not better. Okay, so there's essentially two ways of looking at this law of reverse effect. It's that way, understanding that we can't resist reality, and also recognizing that we can't try so hard to do something. Because reality has a certain flow or way to things, which is what we're talking about with understanding the Tao. So there's power in softness. We live in a world that admires strength, strong words, bodybuilding, military action, the desire for defense, etc. We want to avoid weakness. We are ashamed of it. Weakness is seen as a lack of strength, but it is softness. And here's a quote from Lao Tzu. He says, weakness is how the Tao works. Well, he also told us it's like water. So water and weakness go hand in hand, but bear in mind, the water overcomes the hard. We saw this before. The soft approach does not come from anger, impatience, or fear. It is the intelligent approach. It's the Wu Wei approach. It may be unpopular, yet it is so fertile. It's unpopular to sit back or to do nothing, but yet it is fertile for a ground of creativity, for ideas. And again, I can relate to this if I'm going to share more personal experience. Being able to be isolated can have a lot of benefits. I think this idea is also explored in the movie and book Ender's Game, where they talk about this kid who is isolated and he's able to be more creative and create more things. As an inventor or somebody who likes to create things, as I said before, having the time alone allows me to actually come up with more ideas than if I was distracted and doing a bunch of things. But doing those bunch of things can help me for my time where I am thinking and relaxed and reflective. So they both feed each other, but we cannot deny the power of softness. We cannot say that softness or weakness is not more powerful or equally as powerful as strength itself. Okay? The individual who may not have a lot of muscle like me, who may not care about looks, well, is that really a bad thing? Just because I don't have physical strength? I may have mental strength. I might have a will that is stronger beyond the person who has physical strength. And that can matter a lot. There's plenty of yogis and people who are spiritual who don't have muscle. And there's plenty of them who do. It doesn't matter. The point is that there's strength in whatever weakness, if you can see why. In the same way you can see how these different judgments we had before about ourselves, these so-called bad judgments of ourselves, are not so much bad. They have a place. And so let's just understand then, putting softness and strength into application in the real world with power systems that be. You have order or chaos. Well, a tyrannical ruler who rules with intimidation and fear actually attracts constant opposition. This becomes a vicious cycle that then creates separation between leaders and followers. There essentially becomes chaos. Whereas the leader who would be virtuous or of integrity is someone way less people would attack, but they also cease to be a visible leader. So there is order as things take care of itself. Isn't that something? Order because things take care of itself. And we talked before about the Yellow Emperor and how he had this dream of a self-governing world where he did not touch much. And because he didn't touch much, things sort of just worked together on its own. We'll be exploring a lot more of this idea and this exact example as well. But for one example, we can look at prison systems. You can look at the large prison system in America. It does more harm than good. It is based on dealing with criminals, based on anger and fear. It is based on hardness, ultimately. Systems that work better are due to softness, allowing individuals to learn how to gain self-control. An example country would be Finland. We may notice similar profound truths in observing the success of nonviolent resistance. Nonviolent resistance is a form of protest in which there is no violence used. And it works some of the best, actually. There's a lot of scientific research about this as well, how the greatest revolutions in history have always been nonviolent resistance forms. And so just some examples would be Mahatma Gandhi, the Quakers, and Martin Luther King Jr. So should people change simply because others are doing it, because they have no choice, or because it's actually the better choice? You tell me. When it comes to the prison systems, when it comes to solving the problems in the world, should they just do it because it's conformity, or because they have no choice, or because it's actually a choice that is better? And this is why nonviolent resistance works as well. They didn't need violence to prove their point because they stood with the truth and they trusted the truth to do its own work on its own without counterintuitive action. Because they saw that if they were trying to end violence, why would they introduce violence? It would just feed more violence, and it would be easy to put the blame on them for the violence in the very first place, and it would make their cause less successful. So Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. and these individuals and these different groups throughout the world, throughout history, that have used nonviolent resistance, prove to the world, hey, you can do it all without weapons. You can simply change hearts and minds, and the world will change on its own. Because there's a certain truth and order to the world. There's this Tao that if you work with, you can actually produce better results than trying to forcibly and hardness work with the Tao, which it can't work like that, because softness and water is the way of the Tao. So when we have conflict in our lives, the act of sitting silent and questioning allows the individual to learn more. They may have the most knowledge because of it, as they also have knowledge of their approach. They are the softest in a room of individuals arguing over who is right. And so we can't be too firm. When we say survival of the fittest, it does not need to imply survival of the strongest, as one may adapt to their circumstance to survive, rather than having to be the strongest in the environment and overtake everything else. No, maybe it's the exact opposite, and that's why they survive, because they're able to adapt and go with the fact and accept the fact that they're not so strong. Okay? So this is realizing your own power, realizing the value if you aren't so strong. Again, as I mentioned before, how I may not have physical muscle, it doesn't mean I'm weak. I don't have to say I'm weak. I can say I'm strong. But it depends on how you look at it. And the same way we look at water, we say, man, water is weak. Well, it depends on how you look at it, because it can destroy huge civilizations. Careful with what you claim, because your assumptions will not hold up when you see the other side of your own arguments, the yin to the yang, right? And so when you're in a conflict, think about this. Rather than feeding into the conflict and making the conflict worse, maybe learn how to be silent, learn how to ask more questions, and approach with softness instead. And this is also simply represented by the Bao Quan, if I'm saying that correctly. It's essentially this movement right here in martial arts, okay? So it's one hand, open palm essentially, over a fist. Okay, so this is used commonly in many different martial arts. And in particular, if you're looking at like judo or Tai Chi, this is used as like a bow or for starter moves even in attack. Okay, so when there's even such a thing as attack in these martial arts, it's more so avoiding combat so that the attacker essentially attacks themselves. And so the hard fist is the yang, and that symbolizes rigorous practice, attack, okay? But the soft open hand, yin, symbolizes being virtuous and disciplined, stopping the attack, okay? So you can think of it as like self-defense, which is why people get into martial arts, but also the soft overcoming the hard. It is self-discipline and restraint, okay? Self-discipline and restraint. Another interpretation is that to cover aggression with peace is to indicate that there is such a power within you, but you choose not to use it. So I have the ability to take on things with brute force and violence, but I choose not to use it. Maybe I choose it at the right time in the case of self-defense, for instance. Or maybe, even better, I understand the use of non-violent resistance like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. Okay? Because they're like, we don't even need to use self-defense. They're acting very intelligently. So, that's self-discipline. Let's look at a caretaker for an animal as simple as a tiger. A caretaker would not feed live animals to tigers, as this would arouse their ferocity. A caretaker would not feed them when they were hungry or full, so they'd be contented when fed. No force was used here, only knowledge. If force was used, tigers would retaliate or leave. So this is just one example of how a mere caretaker of an animal can learn how to best optimize their environment and make it so that the tiger is not dependent, is not attached, and also is not angry, not fearful, but is just content. And that's essentially the goal, right? Is to just be content. This is happiness, as we mentioned before. So overthinking, this is huge because I definitely have been prone to overthinking in the past. I mentioned this before. We can't overthink. Quote, intellectualization sets up a kind of interval or lack of rapport between you and your life. You think about things so much that you get into the state where you're eating the main ahead of the dinner. You're valuing the money more than the wealth, confusing the map with the territory. Alan Watts. So, are you living in symbols? We want to get into the territory, to get into relationship with what is, as distinct from ideas about what is. So when we look at symbols and I say, are you living in symbols? What I'm actually saying is, are you looking at the context behind words and not just the words? And there's a lot of people who are so focused on paperwork and signing their signature in certain ways and having to do things in certain ways with language and symbols. But what if I just stay silent for the rest of this presentation? Are you okay with that? I mean, are you able to accept the fact that there might be some silence? That my delivery presentation style may not be the best. I mean, are you overthinking the fact I could be doing this presentation better? Are you thinking about my appearance? When instead you can be thinking about this material and really taking it in for your own life? I am so prone to overthinking because I will look at something and I can judge it 100 ways at once, or I can simply just accept it. It's fine. It is what it is. It is how it is, and there's nothing wrong with it because it is how it is. Now, maybe there are some judgments I want to make, but I'm not going to go head over heels on it, as the expression would be. My head is not going to take over my heart. I'm not going to become so passionate and angry about something and let my head get to me, because how many times have you get into an argument with somebody or done something and then maybe a week goes by or a day goes by and you're like, man, that was so dumb. Why did we talk about that? Why did we argue about that? Like, it's just silly. Because we get so wrapped up in here, we don't realize what we're doing. And the symbol on the slide for here is actually called Brahman, and it's a very common Hindu symbol. And so this has to do a lot with what we're talking about here, with recognizing this higher law, this higher principle in the universe. Okay, you can look up that symbol if you want. There's a lot of people who use it to represent a lot of the concepts that we're talking about as well. Again, there's a lot of synchronicities among many Eastern philosophies. So, your experience here on Earth. Quote, what you experience and you are the same thing. Then realize also, going beyond that you are in the external world you're looking at. You see, I'm in your external world, you're in my external world. But I'm in the same world you are. My inside is not separable from the outside world. And then he further goes on to explain, we've completely got rid of the person in the trap, the one who either dominates the world or suffers under it. It's vanished. It never was there. So Alan Watts is telling us here the acceptance. And this is why, you have a picture of a girl basically hugging a tree. She's one with the tree. She realizes the tree is her best friend. The tree's no different from her. The tree, if anything, will live longer than us, right? But it's amazing. We can't live without the trees, and the trees also can benefit from our existence. So there's a shared reality here. It's not just your experience, but our experience. This does not make everything collective because there is still value to recognize in the separate. Just as we would separate yin and yang from each other and then recognize they're both together in the same universe, we don't just stay focused on the fact that everything is one and the same, or the fact that one thing is separate from another. We look at both. This is what makes it integrative and holistic. So you can look at a maple tree, for instance. A maple seed grows into a maple tree, but it's unique. There are patterns, but within such patterns are pluralities. Everything in nature is unique. So you as an individual, you're unique. That's what makes you beautiful. The fact that you will have experiences that other people do not. That you look a certain way that other people do not. Even though we're all humans, the fact that every single one of us looks different from each other, even twins will have differences between each other, is amazing. Because despite the similarities, there still is uniqueness therein. I find that quite powerful. And so let's look now towards status and need, because we're talking a lot about our needs, we're talking a lot about our identity. So the tallest trees catch the most wind. Being at the top requires more effort to stay. There is more competition. So why chase success? This idea of success. What is success? See, the opposite extreme of this would be asceticism, which would be attachment to deprivation. So we don't want to have absolutely nothing, but we don't want to be ahead of the world and have everything that other people do not. So why chase failure either? We don't want to chase success or failure. It's about what we actually need. Animals in nature take as much as they need, and this is moderation among the flow of life. That among your flow, there's going to be things that come to you, and you need to be able to work it into your life. Like those negative thoughts that come to you, you don't ignore them, but you see them as passing by. And just like when you're meditating and those thoughts arise, you acknowledge those thoughts. You don't deny them. You don't push them out of the way, but you acknowledge them and you let them pass by, because you recognize everything does pass in time. Change is law. And so the more we focus on our breath, say in meditation, the more those things just disappear on their own. And so we don't really have to worry about it so much. And so if we pay attention to what we actually need, we don't have to worry so much about all the other things we may attach to that need, that we think we need. And again, the key word here would be think. Our brain gets so much in the way of our body and what we actually need. So for instance, we may say, well, I'm on this diet. I need to eat certain foods. But your body just wants nutrition, or it wants to be healthy in certain ways, and it may not be what your brain is telling you that you should eat. Maybe you have to listen more to your body. So status and need, when people are chasing success or failure, Taoists would say, no, don't chase either one. Recognize that they're both just polarities meant to distract you and pull you toward an extreme. Recognize moderation. And so there's an embodiment that needs to take place. Embodiment means being able to not get stuck in the head, because now you recognize the whole body. The mind is always active. It's always going crazy thinking, right? So if we can be able to let it be in alignment with the body and tone down so we're not all stuck up here, we can become embodied. It's who I should be versus who I am. Recognizing who you actually are. It's conscious of feeling our body and environment. It's feeling the elements, using your senses. It's presence. The burden of the future often negatively affects the present. This is why the best performances of any kind are done when there is no worry. It can be playing a game for fun or practicing to yourself. Immersion or flow breeds skill. As a swimmer forgets the water, a soccer player becomes the field, and a painter becomes the brush. Worry, judgment, and a focus on results can overshadow skill. You don't produce a song just for the end of the song. You can embody winning to never lose. You can choose where to place your attention. In knowing ourselves, we know others, as we are connecting with nature. So that is just a bunch of different examples of how we may understand our Wu Wei, our embrace in life. And at some point in time, we do have to embrace if we want to truly relax, if we do want to be content. And if we want to accept the body that we have, we can't be trying to work so hard against it. Maybe we're putting on loads of makeup and trying to be somebody we're not, right? But if we know ourselves and we accept who we are, we can actually better love ourselves, rather than this artificial, dependent, attached person we become when we say we need makeup to be happy, we need this to be happy. Like there's this common saying in Buddhism, get rid of we, because that's ego, or I, that's ego, and want, because that's desire, and then all that's left is happiness. So embody happiness, be one with happiness, rather than attaching your ego and desire into the mix. Let us find out then, what is real happiness? Money, status, fame, power, knowledge? Are you dependent on these for happiness? Quote, people who can't get these things fret a great deal and are afraid. This is a stupid way to treat the body. People who are rich wear themselves out, rushing around on business, piling up more wealth than they could ever use. This is a superficial way to treat the body. Zhuangzi. What he's saying here is he's looking at, again, two sides of the polarity. People who are so worried about what they can get, and it's a stupid way to treat the body, he says, right? You can't get these things, oh my gosh. Socrates even has quotes about this too, and again, the guy didn't even write, but people created writings based on his teachings. And he said, if you desire something, you're not happy. Once you get it, you're not happy. Even if you had everything, you're still not happy. It's because you're not content. And so don't treat your body in a stupid way. Treat it with intelligence and the fact that it's okay to not have everything in the world. It's okay to have less in the world. It's okay to just accept the way things are. And so, here's another quote, the more wealth you possess, the harder it is to protect. Lao Tzu. And so you can't overfill a cup. Quote, those who know they have enough are truly wealthy. So life is for living. It's not for worrying, it's not for stressing, it's not for desiring, it's for living. That's what makes it the word life. This is what happiness is, it's contentedness. So when we're so worried about even knowledge, man, I don't know enough how to be happy, maybe that's also an issue, because the idea of Wu Wei, of nothingness, of meditation, and the reason why they work for people when they're used without necessarily an intent to use them, just because they're relaxing, just because they are part of their practice, part of their life, they recognize it as an essential part of the life, being the yin, it's just part of the way. It's not in the way, it's part of it. It's not a part of it, right? So we're not looking at knowledge, we're looking at embrace, which is far more than knowledge, because now you're having knowledge of reality. So often when people talk about knowledge, they're talking about things that may not matter, things that are temporary, events, people, these are all temporary, but the spiritual ideas are actually way beyond those. There's another quote that's quite famous online, where if you focus on people or events, they're not as impactful as if you were to focus on ideas. And what we're looking at right now is ideas, so they're way more powerful. But even beyond the ideas is what allows the ideas to be created, which is this silence, which is this emptiness, which is also this contentedness, okay? So there's a balance that needs to be made if you see among what we're talking about in this presentation. The yin and yang is always at work, as I mentioned. Nature has created everything with its own attributes. Only judgment makes it appear as if there is a problem in need of conformity or man-made standards. Why can't we be who we are? Judgment shouldn't be our main mode of operation. Not that we should never judge. So we stay centered, we unlearn, we become who we are meant to be because we simply are ourselves. So, Zhuangzi tells us, follow the middle, go by what is constant, and you can stay in one piece. Keep yourself alive, look after your parents, and live out your years. So go by the middle sounds a lot like what we said before about moderation. Not having too much, but not having too little either. Working smart instead of working hard. It means to set your sails to work with the wind. Our efforts not to be unhappy generate anxiety. Our desire for happiness is why we are unhappy. We must balance our emotions, as even being too happy can also backfire. La-da-dee-da, I'm super happy in life, and then you realize, shoot, something sad happens and it can push you down. Unless, of course, you want to remain happy, and you can. Just realize that one extreme to the next, If you're too happy and you're too busy being happy, you might forget about something serious that requires a serious mentality, right? There's a reason why there's love. There's a reason why there's seriousness. So everybody might say, love is the answer. Well, yeah, but also not loving at certain times. You need to know when is the right time to act. There's a reason why there's people who have to be serious at times, but sometimes, and a lot of the time, they put in their own head, I have to be serious, right? So recognize we're probably being serious more than we have to, and maybe we can be too loving more than we have to. But that there's an essential value in recognizing when to be serious, when to be loving, when to be happy, when to be sad. And if we're going to attach ourselves to those things, that's when we get stuck. And we don't want to get stuck because we recognize nature is ever changing. And if we want to go it that way, it doesn't get stuck. And so being like water, being able to flow past the hurdles and just let things be. So balance, in this case, is actually then self-control. It's an art. It's to not exceed. And by having this balance, it allows us to create peace. So balance for peace, self-control for peace. This is how we find peace. So we talked about happiness, we talked about peace. What this ultimately is all for is to conquer thyself. Conquering others takes force. Conquering yourself is true strength. Knowing what is enough is wealth. Lao Tzu. Quote, there is no greater calamity than not knowing what is enough. There is no greater fault than desire for success. Therefore, knowing that enough is always enough. If you worship or place real-life value on money and things, then you will never have enough. Worship your own body or beauty, then you will always feel ugly. When time and age starts showing, you will suffer. Worship power and you will end up feeling weak and afraid, needing more power to numb your own fear. Worship your intellect and you will end up feeling stupid. Now, if you don't understand why any of these would be the case, psychologically, mentally, then I encourage you think about it and reflect on it. Reflect on these words. There's a reason why Lao Tzu wrote what he wrote. And even though knowledge can be dangerous, we often also recognize how powerful and useful it is. It's just you get to a certain point where you realize knowledge is not everything, and that there's actually value in not having knowledge, which allows you to have knowledge in the first place. Maybe you'll get there along your path if you keep following your heart, you keep reflecting on these topics, because that came to be my conclusion, and it came to be Socrates' conclusion of, wow, I know that I know nothing. That's the meaning of true knowledge. That's what he said. And so true knowledge is not knowing anything or knowing nothing. To know that he knows nothing, meaning that really there's so much more he doesn't know yet. So he can't really say he has knowledge. There's so much mystery. And I think this opening effect is what the Taoists are leading us to recognize we need to keep opening our minds, to realize we can't get stuck. And so when we worship something and we praise something and we say this is what we need in life, we need to reevaluate, is that really what we need? Is that actually what's going to help us? And so we need to learn then how to face problems. Problems cannot exist without a perceiver, as circumstances aren't troublesome without someone or something identifying them as such. Therefore, nothing is inherently problematic about reality. We create problems that don't exist. If we see beyond the titles and ideas or just our perception, we're able to see this. And this includes the notion of morality. It does not mean we disregard what we may consider moral. It means we recognize that others may have different perceptions from us, and that our perceptions is not the truth, that we have to ultimately work together to find the truth, because we are among each other. So no one person has the truth all figured out. So that's not a reason to then praise one person, or praise some standard and say this is the only way. but actually it's more of a means to recognize we need to keep learning and recognize that our problems are just stepping stones toward more solutions, and that the problems don't have to stop us, and nor does our learning, nor does our solutions. If our problems don't stop us, then why are our solutions stopping us? That's how we're going to run into problems, because we have to recognize both our problems and our solutions are not set. They too are prone to change, because change is that law. It is nature. And then therefore you may say nature is the only solution. But it's a very grand one that involves so many of these internal polarities within. We'll talk more about that as well. So in Buddhism, to give more perspective upon this, there's a concept called the two truths. And those two truths are relative truth, which is conventional, subjective, or perception, and absolute truth, which is the world as it is. It's the objective. The relative obscures the absolute, as it is a perception of reality, but not reality itself, and therefore it's an illusion. The absolute truth in Taoism is considered Tao, which is way or nature, so it's seen as this thing that is the objective. Okay, so you can see these man-made standards as among the relative truth, and you can see the Tao as this absolute truth. Quote, "The Tao is like an empty container. It can never be emptied and can never be filled. Infinitely deep, it is the source of all things. It dulls the sharp, unties the knotted, shades the lighted, and unites all of creation with dust. It is hidden but always present. I don't know who gave birth to it. It is older than the concept of God." And so that's a quote from Lao Tzu. He doesn't know who gave birth to it. He's admitting to what he doesn't know. Isn't that a beautiful thing? Especially from a philosophy or what some people call a religion, which we'll talk about too. Admitting to what you don't know? That's blasphemy. You have to know it. You're saying this is how the way is, and this is what the world is, and this is how the world works. He's saying no. That's the problem, is people thinking they have it all figured out. Because you cannot fill the Tao. It's an empty container. It's nameless. That's what makes it so absolute, is this idea of how universally obscure it is, but yet present it is. And so this also ties into the idea of a Li, or organic pattern, that we can recognize an order, but we can't really put a name on it. And it is not Tao itself, but it connects to this concept. We'll talk about that too. So going back to the idea of problems then, if we're looking at truth and there's this relative and absolute truth, let's see what Alan Watts tells us. He says, so long as you are in the present, there aren't any problems. Things just do what they do. There was the coming in at the door person, and the person sitting here and now is not the person who will die. All the past and the future, you feel it dragging at you every way. Suppose you wake up in the morning and it's a lovely morning, and some of us have got to go to work on Monday. Is that a problem? For many people, it is. It spoils the taste of what's going on now. When we wake up in bed on Monday morning and think of the various hurdles we've got to jump that day, immediately we feel sad and bored and bothered, whereas actually we're just lying in bed. So I find that amazing because it's true, you know, how many times we worry about something that hasn't even happened yet, and how often too when you make plans in this life, it doesn't go according to plan. So why do we worry so much about the future? Again, it's going to give us anxiety, and if we're looking at the past, we might get depressed. So we want to stay present. Buddhists state, quote, suffering exists, but no one who suffers. Deeds exist, but no doers are found. A path there is, but no one who follows it. And nirvana is, but no one who attains it. Again, basically saying the same thing Alan Watts is saying here, where we're worrying about problems that we don't even have. We are saying that there's things that need to be done, but no one's doing them. Like, we are contradicting ourselves because of our desires and our suffering that we create from it. So, problem solving. How do we solve problems? Well, you need to feel free to make mistakes in order to find the truth or learn how to do something. And you need to take your time. And so a question you can ask yourself is, are you looking for faults? Are you looking for, man, am I not good enough? When do I need to be doing something better? And you can change your appearance, and you can continue to embrace the concept of fault. Man, I do not look good enough, people will say. Rather, we can change our attitude, which is the one thing we can change, and that is our mind. It's mentalism, the principle of mentalism, right? That which creates all things. These things that I have around me, this glass of water, which, by the way, we should take a water break, this had to be thought of by somebody in order to exist. So, we can change our attitudes, feelings, and experiences of circumstances, but we can't change the circumstance itself. Unless we want to change the circumstance, guess what? You still have to change your attitudes, feelings, and experiences. That's the only way you're going to do it. Again, staying on the now rather than looking so at the results and looking at the things that haven't even happened and don't even know if they will happen. So why do we forget something painful? It's because we changed. Some problems are better dissolved than solved. And this is the value in non-action, meditation, and making space for solutions. So this would be essentially the Taoist way you may be able to problem solve in your own life. We need to, in this process, celebrate life, because again, seeing things as problems can be an issue within itself if instead we can see it as part of the process of life. We don't need to cling to life, we can celebrate life. Quote, I have heard that those who celebrate life walk safely among the wild animals. When they go into battle, they remain unharmed. Lao Tzu. The fear of death is what makes us cling to life. And so, it was actually quite funny. Yesterday, I was at the beach and I sat in the water, in the ocean, and I sat so still that there were actually fish swimming around me. And there were people who were not so far from me, but they didn't have any fish around them because they were moving so much and doing a bunch of things and yelling. And I was still, I didn't let that affect me, and my breathing was so relaxed because that's the beach, it does that to you as well. And what a serene moment, and then to have the fish just swim around. I had like 10 different fish. I was basically one among the animals. And I've also had friends tell me about how they've been on mushroom trips, or how if you're relaxed and you go into a lake, say with an alligator, the alligator won't feel the need to attack you because you aren't going in with a fearful heart. They can sense your heartbeat. They can sense your presence in the water because they're one with the water. So they can tell if you're in a mode of panic. And this is why some people will say, hey, if a dinosaur's looking at you, stay still or don't panic, and they'll leave you alone. Because if you panic, that's when they start running after you, right? There's been many different analogies to that type of thing. Just figured to mention it. But it's the fear of death, that's what makes us cling to life. Because again, death is just part of the process of life. And in the process of fearing death, we become a threat who are more likely to be attacked. We cling to wealth, beauty, and reputation. And if these things are life to us, that is where their fear of death really is. Somebody who really clings their life to these material things, losing those things, oh man, I have no life now. What? Your life is way more than those material things. No, my life it depends on these material things. That's what makes me happy. They put it in their own mind that without those things, they can't be happy. And so they quite literally cling to material things for their life. And we can also, again, do this with death, which is a rather more natural concept, but we don't accept the fact that it is a natural concept because we fear it happening, when fear is always going to detract us away from embracing what is. So fear is not usually ever really a good thing in our life, but being that it does exist, recognize where it is perhaps useful. It's perhaps useful in the nick of the moment. Let's say something is about to attack you and you need to react. You need to be able to react intelligently which your fear can get in the way of, but your fear will allow you to snap in an instant, to be able to instinctually move. So it's still there, but then being able to overcome the fear can make you really, really effective in what you do. So there's no need to worry. Change is to be embraced. Death is a natural process. And again, Zhuangzi, he wept a little bit about his wife dying, but he did not worry long because he realized it was part of the process. So he says here in this quote, it's nonsense even to think about whether heaven and earth can or cannot be destroyed. Whether they will perish or not is something we don't know. If heaven and earth will not perish, that's great. We can live our lives without worry. However, if they will perish, that's something we can't do much about. So why worry about it? So he's saying in either case, no matter what you think about heaven and earth being destroyed or not, there's no need to worry. So let us not assume nor worry. He's telling us to be more carefree, to let go into the world and have more trust, because all this worry that we create is, again, these problems that don't exist, that we make for ourselves. So let us now understand what this whole process is called in Taoism. When we understand the value of emptiness, understand the value in not being so fearful, not being so attached to the material things, recognizing death is just part of life, it all has to do with this concept in Taoism called fasting the heart. Now, the Chinese word for heart is jin. I'm not sure how to say that exactly, but it means mind, or the heart mind. Okay, so the heart is actually the mind in Chinese. So that can get a little confusing, but anytime you see fasting the heart, you can then think of the mind, or heart mind. And so Confucius even tells us, you hear not with the ears, but with the mind, and not with the mind, but with your soul. So the idea of detoxification is applied in whole in Taoism. It is important to silence our senses and learn how to let go. So we're not just detoxifying our body in the sense of nutrition, but in our own thoughts, our own brain. Since we cannot know or perceive the Tao, we can, however, feel it through oneness and inner peace after we go through this unlearning process we talked about. The unschooling, the unlearning of letting go of the man-made illusions that are there stopping us from becoming who we are. Okay, so the fasting thereof sensory, including thought and pleasure, will help us actually achieve inner peace. And remember, peace has a lot to do with balance and self-control. So fasting the heart helps us gain a greater control over our senses and what we do in this life. And the same reason why somebody would probably be fasting in nutrition as well, because they want to have more control over their own health, so that way disease does not take over the body. And fasting has many benefits in health, for instance, which is why people do it, for all sorts of different reasons. And again, it's literally not eating anything. It's apophysis. It's the negation of something, not the addition of something, but the negation. So why do we fast the mind? Well, the more stern we are, the more brittle we become. The stronger we desire something, the more painful not acquiring it becomes, as we said before. The more troubled our thoughts, the darker we see the world. The more we feel like we possess something or someone, the more domineering we become. The mind wants to separate yin and yang, when they are inseparable in reality. And so when we embrace imbalance, like us versus them, or attaching ourselves to viewpoints, it creates division. Using the mind helps us, okay? It helps us with many things in our lives, as you may be able to acknowledge from the yang perspective. But the mind can use us without learning how to fast the mind, or fast the heart. So fasting the mind is essentially quieting the mind. And you can see this picture here. It's like, I don't know what this is. Seems like some sort of flow, but do you really need to think about it? I mean, it's just a slide. It's just an image. It is what it is. So let's clear our vision. Fasting the heart or mind may also be known as fasting the conscience. And for any of you who don't know, consciere, means to know together. So there's a lot of things we might know, and there's a lot of things we might conform to that other people know. But that knowledge still can help distract us from what is happening now in our present reality. And so Lao Tzu tells us, can you coax your mind from its wandering and keep to the original oneness? Can you let your body become supple as a newborn child's? Can you cleanse your inner vision until you see nothing but the light? Can you love people and lead them without imposing your will? Can you deal with the most vital matters by letting events take their course? Can you step back from your own mind and thus understand all things? Seeing a greater knowledge, Lao Tzu is telling us, is seeing past our points of view where we say we have knowledge, which again is the humility that Socrates had when he said, I know that I know nothing, or that there's more that could be known that I don't currently know, because life is ever teaching us more and more, and life is ever changing. So we create a clear conscience by fasting our heart, fasting our mind, and we become receptive. As we become still, like water in a valley, the mud settles and the water becomes clear. Why do people fast in health? Self-healing. Well, it's the very same phenomenon here. The mind can self-rejuvenate. Our thoughts can self-heal themselves. So we can think more clearly, more rationally. So perhaps instead of trying not to abstain from the pleasures or material things as you would in other practices like Buddhism, we can quiet the mind and become still, returning to source. Which again, a lot of other Eastern philosophies also do. Okay, so not to generalize here, but to say that we don't have to just cut out material things and think that's what's going to make our lives better, or just stop doing the things that we think are destructive. Rather, we can fast our heart and quiet the mind. It can be used to go from yang to yin for balance. So can you really enjoy life if you are always analyzing everything? Are you reactive? What gets you somewhere in the first place? It's openness. We need humility, not getting stuck or getting arrogant. So we live with what cannot be avoided, and we starve the mind of distractions. That's ultimately this process of fasting the heart. Are you living with what is ultimately reality and what cannot be avoided, and starving the mind of the distractions, the things that are pulling you toward ideology, and this is how things must be done, and this is how we must view the world, and this is what I need to do, this is what's going to make me happy. Instead, you recognize, okay, my body's telling me I'm hungry, so I can't really avoid that. I'm going to accept it, right? I'm going to go along with its desires. But these other desires, I recognize they're not so natural. They came about in this yang-based world, and they're going to take control of me if I don't take control of it. So this process of fasting the heart creates what is called the uncarved block. This is another term used in Daoism. Very, very core and essential. In fact, I even define Dao as the uncarved block itself in the beginning of this presentation. So the uncarved block represents the beginner's mind, or our childlike nature. It is where our vision is clear, as there is no ego keeping us stuck. Your nature is still wood, even if you're carved. Think of it like that. You're a block of wood. This is what the uncarved wood or uncarved block represents. But when it gets carved, we need to realize we're still wood, even if we've been changed over time or in different forms. An uncarved block has unlimited potential. It is simplicity, because it hasn't been carved. It hasn't been malformed from its original state. So this means dropping religions, politics, ideologies, and standards, assumptions, attachments, expectations, desires, burdens alike. Sounds like a big task for a lot of people in today's world, but who am I to say it's a big task? Why are we saying it's a big task? See, If you were making assumption to say, well, I can't do that, I can't get rid of religion and politics, it's always on my mind, this is something that makes me who I am, well, now you got an attachment going. Okay, so I think being aware of how those attachments affect you and your ego will be a helpful stepping stone in understanding this uncarved block and fasting the heart. And so we need to chip away at that ego with fasting the heart. And so the modern world is obsessed with image and even viewing images for such. And we need to become shapeless, to not be formed into those images in order to move like the river. For instance, if you see praise and blame create each other, you don't give into the division. You don't praise, you don't blame. You just accept both. They aren't fed. Like this quote here from Evelyn Waugh, to understand all is to forgive all. And again, what Lao Tzu said before, to really have this fasting of the heart mentality, you are able to see all things. So you see the place of praise and blame, but how they essentially create each other. So if you start praising one person, in a sense, you would be blaming another. And you may not realize it like that, and you may not see it like that, but the Taoist point of view and the yin-yang point of view helps us see that. So we need to achieve the still point, which is another way to also say this. Quote, "Renounce knowledge and your problems will end. What is the difference between yes and no? What is the difference between good and evil? Must you fear what others fear? Nonsense. Look how far you have missed the mark." Lao Tzu. And he's referring to following the way of the world past all the debates, to see all sides as part of the whole, beyond just black and white. Again, seeing the whole yin-yang and how they both work with each other. Here's another quote from Zhuangzi. "When there is no more separation between this and that, it is called the still point of the Tao. At the still point in the center of the circle, one can see the infinite in all things." Quote, "The Tao," said the master, "belongs neither to knowing nor not knowing. Knowing is false understanding. Not knowing is blind ignorance. If you really understand the Tao, beyond doubt, it's like the empty sky." So again, being able to see life originally and as it is, simply as it is. This sounds not so easy, but again, when we say it's not so easy, we are putting that in our own head. So be aware of it, because you may acknowledge that when you were a kid, you viewed the world way more simplistically, and now you have all these worries that you did not have when you were a kid. Recognizing that alone can be quite powerful for this concept of the uncarved block, or the still point. But it's even greater now that you have the ability to think and rationally go about in your own life, that you can work with your mind instead of against it. You can work with your body instead of against it. So these two can be whole and together and connected. And everything in life can be seen as together and connected and whole, so long as you do not create divisions among it. That's your choice. Okay? So this is the Taoist method. Okay? The Taoist method is the ability to dissociate and distance ourselves from our societal or social roles. Even spiritual gurus are prone to illusion and ego, so nobody is exempt from this. Nobody's got it perfect, okay? We all must be aware of the things we may not be aware of. This is the whole concept of yin or meditation or the uncarved block and the still point. The more you care about other people's approval, the more you become their prisoner. And here's a quote from Matthew 18:3. So this is from a Western religion, the Bible. "Truly I say to you, unless you are converted and become like children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven." So a way of sort of reminding us and helping us understand this uncarved block. We become more like the uncarved block without the pollution of the world that occurs through socialization, culture, advertisements, etc. So does that mean exposing ourselves less to that? Well, it can certainly help. But maybe even greater understanding how they affect us and how they maybe even program us to this day. We do certain things maybe unconsciously that we don't recognize that we're doing. So why are we giving our energy away to social media, for example? And this is a big point of contention too. A lot of adults will even blame a lot of the world's problems on technology and social media. And this new generation won't realize that because they grew up with it, so they take it for granted. They don't realize there was a world before that where people were more socially together. So unless you took the time to step back and really empty your mind, you would not see that. And that requires seeing beyond social media and thus seeing reality and how nature has always operated for so long. If we accept social media as our reality and we're giving it all our energy and attention, we might not be giving real connections and real relationships our attention and energy. So we are to go to the stillness or the simplicity or the no-thingness, back to within what may be the past. Being uncarved occurs by fasting the heart or mind, or wiping the Tao, as it is said. Nature is actually perfect then in this view, and we only perceive it as imperfect because we learn to accept this is the world we are given. What are we going to try to go against it? We have to learn how to work with it. So we are then able to realize our problems as gifts, like acne on our skin or even feeling lonely. They can actually help us see things and learn and realize that these are not really bad things. Okay, you're lonely, you think you need company, but you can use this to your advantage to do some things that people who aren't lonely can't do. Oh, you have acne on your skin? Well, at least you have an immune system or a liver that's telling you that there's something going on wrong in the body or something needs to be paid attention to. It doesn't have to be perceived as wrong. And so Alan Watts tells us, quote, "It is to work upon nature with skill and craft, but to move in the direction in which nature is already going, so that we're going along the way, the flow, Tao of life, so that the uncarved block may be extended into a sculpture." Okay? And so when we talk about cultures and we talk about society, this notion of society, we talk about what a lot of people conform to. There's a book called The End of All Evil by Jeremy Locke, where he even talks about the dangers of cultures, and he talks about it quite extensively. He states, "If authority is not questioned, if it is accepted as the proper ruler over man, slavery is the result. Germans failed to question the culture imposed upon them by the National Socialist Party." So this is an example in history that led to loads of catastrophe simply because people did not follow their own nature, but followed instead an ideology, a standard. So their servitude to Adolf Hitler and his war machine were the result. Billions failed to question the culture of brotherhood championed by communism. Totalitarian slavery and the deaths of 100 million people was the result. Large or small, when you yield your mind to culture, it will make a tool of you for its own purpose. It begins when you limit your speech out of fear of culture. Cultures limit the choices available to people by creating arbitrary rules for your life and enforcing them with peer pressure. Crushing the spirit of people allows culture to gain their obedience. So I find that amazing as a quote. This whole book is very simplistic, much like the Tao, and has great meaning within it. So if you don't know about it, I would recommend reading it. Mostly because it helps you just tear away at a lot of the programming that you may have been in. But always have an open mind to see, is there any programming taking place even within this book? Even within my presentation, right? There's always that nuance to things of seeing the bigger picture. So in this case, he's saying whether you followed Hitler or Stalin or anybody at the time, you were following a culture and that led to chaos. And it did. History has shown it on repeat for thousands and thousands of years. And so there's people who have been debating Taoism online. Not much, really, though, because Taoists wouldn't be the type to really debate. But if you do look it up, you might find this video online. by an atheist group called Cross-Examined. So they particularly look at Western religion and criticize it. But this video is titled "Dude Left Taoism in Less Than 3 Minutes." So this is a popular video online, but unfortunately, it doesn't have a lot of context and the 3 minutes is very short. So in a popular clip titled "Dude Left Taoism in Less Than 3 Minutes," an atheist speaker asks a curious Taoist student. So this guy is just asking a question and he walks up and the guy challenges him and says, "If the Nazis were going to take over America, would you go with it or would you resist?" Now the student said he would resist, and the atheist used it as a ground to say that he is not a Taoist. But as you would know if you watched any of this presentation and studied any of Taoism, this argument is fundamentally flawed. As noticed by many in the comment section, you can see I screenshotted many of them. And nonetheless, the student was admired because the student was willing to be like, yeah, I'd resist. He wasn't stuck on his idea of like, yeah, I'd go with the flow. He was like, yeah, I'd resist because he's being honest. That's what he would do. And he just allowed the argument to play out as it did, even though the atheist guy tried to make him look bad or whatever, tried to be right and made him look wrong. He wasn't caring about the looks. He just went up there, expressed his honesty, and that's what happened. And people actually admired him in the comment section just for that alone. And so Lao Tzu even simply debunks this argument that the atheist used in this video. He says, quote, "Weapons are instruments of fear. They are not a wise man's tools. He uses them only when he has no choice. Peace and quiet are dear to his heart, and victory no cause for rejoicing. If you rejoice in victory, then you delight in killing. If you delight in killing, you cannot fulfill yourself." And so just look at some of these comments. Taoism doesn't say never resist. Taoism is in essence finding the most successful way around an obstacle by adjusting yourself to the circumstance, emulating the qualities of water, right? And he uses the Bruce Lee quote in that comment. There's another comment that says, "That kid actually seems open-minded. He didn't have to cuss the speaker out or ad hom him. He took it in stride and went about his day." And it's true. And then another comment said, "That man was just ignorant." And he's talking about the atheist. "He didn't even try to understand the concept. He just asked to embarrass the guy in front of the crowd." Another comment said, "Exactly. Considering Taoism is also so deeply connected to martial arts, it's safe to assume that they had a last resort in mind. I don't disagree with any of the speaker's beliefs, but I think if he had someone come on that is well educated in the philosophy of Taoism, then they would find that they mostly agree." And here's other comments. "I don't think the kid knows enough about Taoism to really make an argument for it. Being in flow is more like finding a way round your problems rather than resisting them straight on. It doesn't necessarily mean that a Taoist would go along with the Holocaust." And another comment even said, "Right, the speaker was actually really dismissive with this example. If you think about it, genocide is against Tao and violence is completely appropriate as a last resort." And so these guys, they understand it, these comment sections, and you can see there's hundreds of people upping their comments, but it doesn't seem like they ever really addressed this as far as I'm concerned or am aware of, and atheists probably don't understand how much they can actually agree with Taoist understandings of the universe, as I have shared many examples also across this presentation. And you can even see this video here where Taoism is talked about on the atheist experience, but there's no problem here. Really, and you watch the video and it's like, okay, in many atheist encounters, if you find any with Taoists, there doesn't seem to be a problem. And since Taoists don't impose religious views, they aren't also a problem for those who are not atheists. So Taoism seems to be quite accepting in the sense of it's a life philosophy. The atheists don't have a problem with it because they're not making any superstitious claims or claiming to worship anything. They're simply understanding the way of the world and how it operates, and they want to know about it just as much as the atheist, except maybe they also want to recognize the problems with knowledge itself, which I would say and maybe argue that the atheists don't know about. And again, I wouldn't expect the Taoists to really debate in the first place. If they would be debating, it would be probably to help the other person recognize that debating is part of the issue itself, and that we shouldn't have such a hard mind in the first place. So when we have a natural religion like Taoism, it's because we do not need to rely on an external God to align our actions with the harmony of the world and find balance. Our spirituality can align to science. You can be a Taoist without even knowing Taoism, or dressing in certain ways, or in partaking in certain rituals. In other words, the words Tao is not a requirement for aligning to nature. So a tribe, or some people who are really in touch with nature, they may have a whole different language and way of going about the world, but they're in sync with the universe, and therefore they follow the Tao without even knowing it. Just as we found quotes from many other spiritual texts and teachings therein that also align to Taoism, we don't need to say, oh, well, they're not Taoism, so they're bad, we shouldn't look at them. We can recognize, wait, there's a unifying quality here. Because, see, dogmatic religions divide us. People will even consider certain diets religions, certain other ideologies that people don't usually consider religions as religions, and that's because of how dogmatic or divisive they can be. And that's because they prevent us from embracing change. Somebody who might be stuck in a Catholic faith, for example, in the light of science, may deny what science is bringing up, and we see this all throughout history. But recognizing that's just part of change, we can not be so resistant to it, and recognize science should actually support what our spirituality entails. And so Taoism was never meant to be a religion or even a term. Fun fact, many astrological concepts and deities associated with Taoism were not intended originally. Lao Tzu and Lao Tzu, a lot of these figures, Zhuangzi, they did not talk about Taoism as a religion whatsoever, with deities and all these things that may be associated with Taoism. Very important to know about, because when you look it up, it's going to be mentioned as a religion by many people, when I simply see there's not enough evidence for that. It was particularly sparked into religion in later centuries by Zhang Daoling in the Way of the Five Pecks of Rice. But they used Taoism to their advantage politically and culturally, which clearly goes against a lot of the teachings of Taoism to begin with, as demonstrated in this presentation, and among any works that you may understand online or just reading the Tao Te Ching to begin with. And so when people turn things into religions, it can make things very divisive if they are dogmatic and they close their mind to other religions. And so, for instance, after China became communist in 1949, millions of monks were reduced to thousands. Much of the Taoist heritage was destroyed, especially from 1966 to 1976. So maybe part of the reason why Taoism is not so popular in practice for a lot of the world is because the cultures and ideologies have been battling it directly. But I do see it going to rise again, inevitably, because it's sort of the nature of the Tao. It's the nature of water. It's the nature of the softness of this philosophy. And I don't see there being anything that can stop it. It's helping a lot of people. And also, I have a lot of supporting reasons for this at the end of this presentation. But Taoism philosophically has always been generally accepting of others. Is our philosophy based in trust and openness, not separation or forcing nature's will? Because forcing nature's will and separating ourselves from others is the exact opposite of what Taoism teaches. And you can argue a lot of other religions teach compassion and stuff too, but they don't always practice it. It's usually because they get turned into religions. They turn into dogmatic cultural divides. And so, you can look at Taoism, especially through the philosophy that I'm introducing here, based purely on the original text, as the middle ground between atheism and religion, as it recognizes science and randomness while also recognizing a self-governing order. And I think that's what makes Taoism unique among all these other types of ideologies that might be associated among it, is the fact that it's able to be like water and the fact that it can align to both religion and science. And I think that's what makes it so powerful. So do you think it's likely for a Taoist to debate, or would a Taoist want to be proven right? Like I said, I think the most they would want would be to shatter the closed-mindedness of individuals or the hard-mindedness of people with their softness. And because of their soft approach, I wouldn't likely see them in a debate. That's me personally and my thoughts on that. You can share your thoughts with me as well. And so it's about understanding Eastern philosophy has a unique view on the world that is not often seen in the West. And the West is often associated with a lot of scientific advancement and being able to have all the science to do things medically. And I think the East has always said we don't necessarily need that. We can understand the body even without it. So Carl Jung even explains to us here, quote, "The West emphasizes the becoming human, and even the personality and historicness of Christ, while the East says, without beginning, without end, without past, without future. Following his conception, the Christian subordinates himself to the superior, divine person in expectation of his grace. But the Eastern man knows that redemption depends on the works of a person devoted to himself. Out of the individual grows the whole Tao. The Amicio Christi will forever have this disadvantage. We worship a man as a divine model embodying the deepest meaning of life, and then, out of sheer intimidation, we forget to make real the profound meaning present in ourselves." End quote. What he's saying here is that people look up to an individual like Jesus, an external figure, or even Buddha, or external figures, and say, these are my sources of enlightenment. Now, in Buddhism, I think the Buddha says, you are the Buddha, and you can even find quotes in Western religions where they say, you have the light within you. Quakers talked about this, the inner light, and so you basically have Christ within you. In that sense, then you're applying the external figures to ourselves, and you're creating a bridge. But oftentimes there are a lot of people who may be worshiping and just depending on others to solve their own problems. And reality may just not work like that. So Carl Jung continues here saying, quote, "It can easily happen to the Protestant that the person Jesus, now removed by centuries, could become the superior man within himself. There would then be reached in a European way the psychological condition corresponding to that of the enlightened one in the Eastern sense. And so we can all better our lives, no matter where you're coming from, what religion you're watching this from, what culture you're coming from. You can see the value that is taught in Taoism or other cultures, and in having nothingness and uselessness and wu wei and the uncarved block and the still point and all the things that we talked about. So this also relates to the idea of simple deism, which is the concept of working with the laws of nature in Taoism. And there's different types of deism, particularly a movement that was created around the 1700s, which is the 18th century. And you can see some charts summing this up, basically saying there's no separation between the creator and creation. They are one, and that it's a mid-ground between atheism and religion, as you recognize that there is this universe that is here for all beings, and there's spiritual laws, or you recognize spirit is just breath, and that we are ever to learn more, or that we recognize there's higher forces than ourselves. There's many ways to interpret deism, but you can say Taoism is a form of simple deism if you want to put it through more of a religious context. And you may even differentiate spirituality versus religion as well. But again, I would like to just call Taoism a philosophy that helps us out in our own life. Thank you very much for watching. This is the end of part 3. Continue with us. We'll be talking about a lot more as time goes on.